Bleach Rebirth of Souls is not an arena fighter. There's been many discussions about this game, whether it's a arena fighter or a regular traditional fighting game. It's kind of complicated, to be honest, when I look at it, because I'm going to delve into the specifics of what makes a fighting game, what makes an arena fighter. So let's just get right into it. First of all, what is an arena fighter? According to Fighting Game Glossary, an arena fighter is a style of fighting game where the action takes place in a large 3D arena and the camera is focused behind your back in a more traditional 3D video game. Arena fighters tend to be based on anime IPs, since they employ extreme movement styles and powerful long-range attacks that suit this subject matter. Common modern examples include Jump Force, Kill la Kill, If, and many of you reading this will grow up on games like Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi series, which are maybe the most famous arena fighters. Does Bleach Rebirth of Souls actually fit into this definition? And it actually does fit into the definition, because 100% that the camera is behind your character that you're playing. You're in a large arena while you're doing the fighting. So it shows that, according to this definition, that it follows through as an arena fighter, right? The difficult thing about this topic is the fact that the reason why people are so very specific on not wanting to define this as an arena fighter is because arena fighter comes with a lot of caveats being described that way. And the biggest reason of why this is the case is arena fighters have a really bad rep now for quite some time, in the recent years especially. Arena fighters are just not taken that seriously. That's just the sad part of it, right? Arena fighters are sort of looked down upon. They'll never be on the same caliber as something like traditional 2D fighters, or even like 2.5D fighters, you could say, or 3D. I'm not sure what to call it that, but games like Tekken, Dead or Alive, Dead or Alive is not taken seriously, but you get the point where it's still considered as a fighter, right? They're not known being on the same level in terms of depth and quality. I think there's a huge problem with that. Just because arena fighters themselves in the recent years haven't been good, that doesn't mean that it has to stay that way, or this negative connotation has to stay on something like Rebirth of Souls or future potential solid arena fighters. In my case, I played the Budokai Tenkaichi series way back in the day. I acknowledge that at the time it was fun because I was much younger, so taste is much different back then. It was a good game, but it definitely did not have the depth of fighting games, like two traditional fighting games, you could say. But because of this sense of idea that arena fighters cannot be more than what they are in terms of the deepness of the game, right? I think that bad connotation needs to sort of go away. When people hear the word arena fighter, it shouldn't include this sense of expectations where you hear the word arena fighter and people are going to automatically negate its credibility. Now, is most arena fighters bad? Yes. For the most part, they're not that great. But understand, by the definition that we just looked at, it's a very, very general term. It doesn't really explain how deep a combat system can get, how deep the movement and all these mechanics can be. Based off that definition, it's just not enough. The definition is not defined by low depth. You know what I'm saying? It's defined by specifically a camera being behind in a large arena. That's the only thing about arena fighters to be qualified that way. Now, here's the interesting thing. Yes, it is an arena fighter, right? However, it is not your typical arena fighter. Now, what do I mean by that? Bleach Rebirth of Souls is probably something very different from anything we've seen so far. Here's the thing about this game, that it will probably move and feel completely different than any arena fighter that we've seen so far. Now, what's something that all arena fighters have in common, or at least 90% of them. They have 360 motions for control stick, basically. Like moving around, it's full 360 motion. Rebirth of Souls doesn't move like that. It has specifically 8-way movement. Now, those who are wondering what that is, it's similar to something more like Tekken, Dead or Alive, Virtua Fighter, Soul Calibur, which are fighting games with a lot of depth. What does that actually mean? And what does 8-way movement actually mean in that regard? Well, it creates more specific punish game for reading the opponent and having those specific inputs lined up so much like that is that inputs will be intentional, and the punish game would be intentional in every way possible for reading your opponent going in a specific direction and whatnot, and for you to move in a very specific way that the game allows you to punish in a certain way. Already in the movement department, it's not typically like your traditional arena fighter. Here's another thing. I think in Japanese terms, the arena fighter word or that terminology doesn't exist from what I've seen. Suzuki, the producer for Bleach Rebirth of Souls, he defines this game as a fighting action game. So what is actually fighting action game? Fighting action game is just simply a game, like fighting game, basically. That's all that is defined by. Suzuki never mentioned this to be specifically a 3D fighting game. He did mention Axis fighting game. And an Axis fighting game is also pretty much any game that has 8-way movement. So games like Tekken, Virtua Fighter, Dead or Alive, the same thing. That's how the producer of the game is describing the style of game this is. So he never mentioned 3D from what all the interviews that I just checked out. The word 3D never really popped out. He wants to sort of align this game in a very specific way. And I think Bleach Rebirth of Souls, you need to understand that it's something brand new that we've never seen before in terms of maybe genre defining or whatnot. There's two things we can do here. It's the name for arena fighters. It sticks to only by the baseline definition, which is camera behind the character and large arena. That's it. That doesn't mean that it will have lack of depth and whatnot, but either redefine the name for a game like Bleach Rebirth of Souls, or understand that arena fighters doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing all the time. At the end of the day, to answer the question, is Rebirth of Souls an arena fighter? Yes, it technically is by definition. Does that mean that it will be bad? No, far from it. Far from anything that you're expecting from an arena fighter, in fact. That's the truth. Hope you guys enjoyed, and have a good one. Thank you.